We're back for a very important reason. This is kind of a one-shot show for now, but we'll be starting hopefully again with Eric Ham, as you can see, the political analyst in Washington, D.C., and my very, very good friend who has great insight on all sorts of issues when it comes to politics and world affairs. Um, Monday was a monumental day in American history for a lot of people. The Supreme Court of the United States, or SCOTUS for short, made a ruling on the Trump immunity. It may not have come as a surprise to a lot of people, but the impact and what it may mean, not just for a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency, but for presidents down the road, may have totally changed the way we look at democracy, or even some might say, do we still have a democracy based upon the ruling of SCOTUS? So I want to bring in Eric Ham on this. And Eric, I want to get your take on this. And we don't have another side to this, so I'm going to have to play devil's advocate. I want you to respond to the questions that people who may not agree with you may have on this. So first and foremost, tell us what you think about this ruling. Explain what the ruling was and what you think it means.
Well, let me first preface by saying that I am not a lawyer. I am, as you say, a political analyst. And so I will talk about what the ruling means for us politically, but also even in the political realm. What this ruling means is that when the framers first outlined the Constitution, we know that the Congress was Article 1 and the presidency was Article 2. Article 1 being that they prioritized Congress. In fact, they placed much of the power of the U.S. government in the hands of Congress because they thought it was more representative and that it was more close to the people. In Article 2, where, of course, the presidency is outlined, they made clear that the presidency actually was an office that was deeply, deeply weakened, and that was intentional. Because they did not, in fact, want a king. They did not want sole authority and power to rest with one person. And we have to remember, these were framers who had recently fought a war for their independence from the King of England. So they were trying to do something anathema to what they had just been through. And they also wanted to ensure that what they would establish would be something that the people would actually control and they would actually direct. Well, what we saw on Monday from this Supreme Court actually upends everything that the framers of the Constitution actually implemented. Because what the Supreme Court recently did was they actually not only gave enormous power to the presidency, but what they did was they basically shielded the president from any accountability, because what they are saying is for official acts, the president has immunity. And so to that chilling question, can a president assassinate a political rival using SEAL Team 6, as the dissenter Justice Sotomayor said? The answer to that question is yes, because now the president is immune, because as the commander-in-chief, the president also controls the military, which means he can direct SEAL Team 6 to go after a political rival, and he would be immune because that would be considered an official act. And more importantly, we cannot even ascertain the motives or even the evidence behind that act, because the courts have now deemed that too is off limits.
So I guess my question becomes, as this ruling states now that, and some would state, I guess you would agree, that democracy, when it comes to the chief executive, the commander-in-chief, there really is no democracy, because he can use any excuse as an official act, and be immune from any sort of prosecution or even scrutiny or investigation. Am I getting that correct?
You're absolutely right. It does. And here's what's so powerful about this ruling. because we know the two crimes that a president can be impeached for are treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. So because now the Supreme Court has shielded the office of the presidency from any of these actions, as long as they are couched in official acts, now that means Congress does not even have the authority to actually remove a president, because how would you ascertain treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors if a president is now couching them in official acts? So this makes the office of the presidency completely untouchable. And I think what we are seeing here is the Supreme Court put their finger on the scale, looking at the evidence in this case that the special counsel Jack Smith has brought against Donald Trump, and basically tailored their opinion to protect Donald Trump. And in doing so, they created a more powerful office of the presidency that now means the only way to govern the office of the presidency is by the individual who is in that office actually placing limits within on themselves, because right now, based on what we have from the Supreme Court, no one else can do that.
Okay. There are those who say your interpretation of this or your breakdown of this is not necessarily totally correct, that there are fail-safes. And there are two things to this. That there are fail-safes, and Congress can enact some legislation that would safeguard against a president, say, running rogue and just using any excuse as an official act. There are enough fail-safes to guard against any kind of malfeasance that the presidents can do. What is your response to that?
That simply doesn't exist, because while Congress can, in theory, enact laws that would limit the power of the presidency, the Congress hasn't done so. So right now, we have a president that is a de facto king until Congress actually decides to do something like that, because right now it does not exist. And even if Congress were to enact such a law, it would still be open to interpretation by this Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. There are some conservatives who would argue that, well, look, we need something like this because, what will happen is any act that a president does can be opened up to any kind of investigation or prosecution by the DOJ, the feds. So this gives the president broader powers, sweeping powers to do things whereby he will not be facing prosecution. What is your response to that?
Well, let's use the instance of Donald Trump in his January 6th criminal case. We know that Donald Trump sought advice from White House counsel as well as from the Attorney General's office about what he could and what he could not do in his efforts to try to overturn the election. And at every turn, White House counsel and the Attorney General's office told him his actions were illegal or were breaking the law. And in some instances, there were those who felt that he was going so far beyond the scope of his position as president that they were also willing to resign effective immediately if he continued to do what he was attempting to do. Mm-hmm. And so what we are seeing now is the fact that he would elicit or engage in discussion with these offices of government, that now makes it an official act, thereby not making him liable or accountable for criminal reproach as a result.
So why is it that you have something like this, a ruling that seems to me to be kind of black and white? There are no gray areas. But you have it broken down, I guess, politically by those folks who think this is a good thing and those who don't. when it seems to be, I'm just saying seems to be, I'm trying to stay in the middle on this as much as I can, black and white, where the president can basically do what he wants when he wants. Why are certain people out there, in your opinion, um, don't think this is such a big deal?
Well, one person who doesn't think it's such a big deal is Chief Justice John Roberts, who basically said that Justice Sotomayor was being overly dramatic in regards to her dissenting opinion. Well, we know Chief Justice Roberts, one, has an ideology that believes that the office of the presidency should have enormous power and influence. We also know that Chief Justice Roberts was actually one of the lawyers who actually worked on the case in the Bush v. Gore, which actually sought to make George W. Bush president, of course, when that whole debacle over the election took place. And in fact, three of the sitting Supreme Court justices were involved in that recount legal process that took place that handed the reins of the presidency to George W. Bush. So I think what we're seeing here is that there are those in or on the bench who believe that they want to see more, not less, power given to the presidency. In addition to that, we also have to remember that you have two of the justices that are wholly compromised and should have recused themselves from this ruling. One being Clarence Thomas, because we know that his wife is involved in this investigation, and there are some who believe that she's actually one of the 6 unindicted co-conspirators in the case that was brought against Donald Trump in the 2020 January 6th election interference case. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, he should have recused himself. And of course, we know now about Justice Samuel Alito, who had the flag hanging up upside down as a show of support for those rioters who stormed the Capitol on that fateful day. So it's black letter law that basically both of these men should have recused themselves and not been involved in the opinion that came down on Monday. And so clearly what we're seeing here is this is not only about ideology, but it's also about self-preservation for those on the court, which makes this decision even more tainted, I believe, as a result of what we're seeing play out.
As a result of this ruling, and of course, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a journalist and an analyst like you, there seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, no recourse to this ruling. None of this can be reversed, or none of it can be challenged. This is the rule of law, I guess, for however long this court exists. Am I correct in that evaluation?
You're absolutely correct. There is nothing that can be done. Look, today, President Joe Biden is also a de facto king, because what President Joe Biden can do right now is he can effectively remove Secret Service protection from Donald Trump and order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate Donald Trump. And because he would be giving orders directly to government officials, that would be seen as an official act, which means he would be shielded from prosecution when he leaves office.
Some might suggest that your analysis in terms of using, say, SEAL Team 6, Justice Sotomayor also, in her writings on this, used that also, might be really extreme, far too extreme, and no one's thinking that anything like that could possibly happen. Or no president, even including Donald Trump, where he could get back in office, would do something like that. If that is an extreme example, could you give me any other examples that, say, a president could use with this new ruling that also might be very disturbing in your mind?
That is not an extreme example, and I'll tell you why it's not an extreme example. It's not an extreme example because we know Donald Trump, from his own words, has already said on day one he will serve as a dictator. We know during his time in office, we know he went to White House counsel Don McGahn and pushed for investigations by the Department of Justice into his political rival, Hillary Clinton. He wanted her arrested first, but then when he felt he couldn't get that, he wanted her investigated. So we have already seen the penchant from Donald Trump as president to actually go beyond the powers and the authorities that he had to actually go after his political rivals. In addition to that, we also know that he wanted the military during the summer of the Black Lives Matter protest. We know that he wanted protesters and demonstrators who were protesting outside the White House. We know he wanted them shot and killed. That, again, is something that we know that he wanted. So I don't think it's extreme to suggest that if he is placed in office with these new powers and with this shield of immunity, that he will not press his military leaders to do this. And to take it a step further, if you go to Project 2025, which the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank here in Washington, D.C., has already begun the process of putting together and formulating how government will operate if a Trump presidency actually takes place. We know that they already want to eliminate, beginning with 50,000 Schedule F appointments in the federal government, which means they want to just go down the line and fire 50,000 federal government employees. They believe in doing that, that will put the fear of God in other employees to basically carry out what they want done. So what we're seeing here is this is a campaign that is already beginning to put together an infrastructure that will allow them the ability to do whatever they choose. And now they have a ruling from the Supreme Court that allows them to enact all of it.
I just want to reiterate all this again. This is on point. This is not any show on the left, MSNBC, CNN. This is not Fox News or Newsmax on the right. This is on point. You just mentioned some things again, and before we close, I want you to reiterate this so people know and they can find this, not just by hearing what you say, but as fact, as what Donald Trump wanted to do when he was in office. The Black Lives Matter movement, other things that you just mentioned about investigating Hillary Clinton, wanting to jail her, all these kinds of things. These are things that you mentioned that are fact. I just want you to repeat those again briefly so people know and they can go check this so they don't think that this is something that you were saying on your own and these are some lies or stretching of the truth. Repeat those again, please, Eric Ham.
Well, instead of repeating what I just said, why don't I expand on what I just said? Because if we go to, again, Project 2025, which if you go to the Heritage Foundation website, or if you just Google Project 2025, it will show up. In this manifesto that they have put together, they eliminate the FBI. They eliminate government agencies such as the Department of Education, the Department of Energy. And what we are seeing here is, and then all of that power will then actually rest and be concentrated in the office of the presidency. So what we are seeing here is we're seeing a blueprint where you have 6 conservative justices who are actually working in tandem with the Heritage Foundation to now begin to put together this new formula for how the government will operate under a Trump presidency. And now we have this shield by the Supreme Court that gives this unprecedented power to the office of the president. And this is so striking because today is July 3rd, and tomorrow in this country, we celebrate our Independence Day, our independence from tyranny, our independence from fascism, our independence to think freely, our independence to actually decide how to live our lives for ourselves. And all of that is coming to an end based on this unprecedented ruling by the Supreme Court that literally upends 248 years of constitutional precedence.
You know, it's palpable the way you have broken this down. I, as a journalist and trying also to play the devil's advocate, really don't have too much recourse. I think this is something that we might want to visit again because I want to bring somebody else on this to drive this point home as we, are gearing towards a very important election coming up in November. What SCOTUS has done. I want to thank you, Eric, for giving your insight, but also your analysis and piecing this all together. But I just want to make sure that people know that we want to be balanced on this. I did my best, maybe not to the best of some people, to play the other side of this, but we're going to revisit this again. But I just want to thank you because this is really, really important. I want people to understand exactly what is at stake here, no matter what side you're on. And we still don't know the ramifications of what may happen because this transcends President Biden and what he could possibly do, as you said, or even a former President Trump if he gets back in. This is something for the presidency as a whole. And as I said, 240 years, it just seems to change everything that this country has stood for. At least that's what it seems like. But we're going to get back this again. Eric, thank you so much for being a part of this. And we are going to visit this again. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.